South Africa's official unemployment rate has risen to a record high of 34.9% in the third quarter of 2021. This is from 34.4% in the previous quarter. Statistician-general Maluleka says even though the number of those who lost their jobs decreased, those who've given up looking for work has increased by over 500,000.
Now let us look at what has happened, the movements. In terms of those who were employed in quarter two, we have about 14 million people who were, 14.9 million people who were employed in quarter two. Let me say there is somewhere where there is disturbance. Can we get that controlled? We had about 14.9 million people who were employed in quarter two. The number of those that are employed now has dropped by about 660,000 people to 14.3 million. Let us go straight to those that were unemployed. We were sitting at 7.8 million unemployed people in the second quarter of 2021. That has dropped by 183,000 people to 7.6 million. The number of those that were the discouraged work seekers in the second quarter has gone up by about 545,000 people. And indeed, another 443,000 people went up in the other not economically active. Meaning that now we have jumped from the discouraged work seekers from 3.3 million to 3.9 million, and from other not economically active from 3.5 million to, from 13.5 million to 14 million. Now, what is our unemployment rate? Our unemployment rate is now sitting at 34.9%, having gone up by 0.5 percentage points from the second quarter of 2021. Again, the 7.6 million people unemployed in the third quarter of 2021 represent 34.9% as our unemployment rate.
Those are the figures, unemployment numbers. I mean, if you really look at it in simple terms, is that more people are unemployed. Not only that, more people have given up looking for work, and that is the essence of it. And a huge number of those who are affected are young workers who are eligible and have ability to work, but also women in particular disadvantaged as far as the employment is concerned, and particularly happening within the African community. Many homes have lost their breadwinner, or at least their sources of income in this pandemic, but even before that. Joining me now to unpack this and more is Isobel Frye, Director at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, Country Director at International Labour Organization South Africa, Dr. Joni Musabayana, as well as Dr. Chifipa Mhango, Chief Economist at the Dawn Consulting Group, former Statistician-General Dr. Pali Lehohla, and SACP spokesperson Dr. Alex Mashilo. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Since, I suppose, the 2008 economic meltdown, or maybe even before that, we've been talking of subdued investment and productivity growth, and we say, okay, we know what we need to do. We need to invest in infrastructure, especially transport, energy, digital. We need to enhance people's skills. We need to implement policies that are far-reaching and make sure that they are fair and they create equal opportunity for all. These are things that we say we need to do, and they will put us on a growth path. Why are we failing to achieve the growth path? Dr. Pali, good evening.
Evening, sir, and how are you and my fellow co-presenters or fellow panelists? Yes, well, if a plan doesn't have any numbers as to how many jobs will be created from now on, then that plan is as good as, it's not as good as, it's as good as no plan. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And for all these years, we have produced such plans. If we cannot actually say by 2030 we'll have 8 million people employed through the following processes, that plan it's not worth it. I mean, if you look at the MTBPS, it said nothing about how many jobs will be created. And for as long as the unemployment issue is a matter for itself, unlike the inflation targeting, where there is action by the Reserve Bank, unemployment will be an offer. For instance, I've been computing the numbers from 2008 first quarter. The unemployed people have risen from 4.4 million in 2008 first quarter to 7.4 million. I mean, the youth, the young people, those who are 15 to 34, have moved from 4.4 million to 7.4 million. The number that is now employed is 2.1 million less than what it was in 2008, against a population that is rising. That's a crisis of monumental size that any talk about we will do this, we will do that, is not worth even saying it. I think a government has dismally failed to create the employment, to create the policies that enable South Africa to get jobs going.
Dr. Alex,
and that's the fundamental problem.
Dr. Pali, characterizing our performance weakness as planning really with no numbers, really planning to fail. Please unmute there for us. Give us your sense of why are we failing to achieve a high growth path? What are our specific performance weaknesses? Dr. Alex Mashilo?
Thank you very much. I would like to put it in a historical context, perhaps, as my starting point. The lowest unemployment rate in our democracy was in 1995. That was a whooping 16.5%. What happened after that? In 1996, the government imposed GEAR, the policy called Growth, Employment and Redistribution. In that year, unemployment shot up to levels above 20%. And from 1996 up to today, it never came down to any level below 20%. It has been fluctuating above 20%, and the lowest was in 2008, which was 22.5%. International developments, such as the global economic crisis, the end of the global commodity super boom in 2011, and now the COVID-19 crisis have worsened our unemployment situation. The reality is that we have long-term policy failure. All the time we were told that the fundamentals were in place, but those fundamentals failed to resolve the unemployment crisis. And until we introduce changes in our macroeconomic framework, we are highly unlikely to lower our unemployment rate. This is what the policymakers should understand. I agree with Dr. Pali Lehohla when he says that the Reserve Bank acts quarterly through interest rates when they want to suppress or adjust inflation, while there is actually little that can be showed about what is done in terms of the unemployment rate. If the situation remains as is, by 2020, by 2030, we will still remain at high rates of unemployment. And by the way, allow me to just add the following points. The figures we present are too general, except for the figures on youth unemployment. In South Africa, unemployment is an African reality. The African people are the worst affected. Their unemployment rate in terms of the narrow definition is 38.6%, while it is 51.1% in terms of the expanded unemployment. They are followed by the colored and the Indian, while the whites are the least affected at 9.2% in terms of the narrow definition and 11% in terms of the expanded definition, which accords with what is happening in Europe and the United States. So it is important for us to unpack these figures in terms of race, as well as in terms of gender, because also women in that regard are the worst affected than men.
Certainly will do that. Key forces shaping economic development in the world: globalization, digitization, environmental, as well as demographic degradation. Some of those issues being raised right now as key drivers of the situation that we are seeing. What has been shaping our economic development? What have we been preoccupied by? We'll get that from Dr. Chifipa Mhango in a moment, as well as Isobel Frye, and we'll get Dr. Joni Musabayana as well to weigh in on that. And then hoping to come up with what are the low-hanging fruits? What is it that we need to do right now? What should be the economic agenda of a nation with such high unemployment? 46.6% if you use the expanded definition. We're back in a moment. Let's get your views as well. 072-110-558.
Look at the expanded unemployment rate. We see a jump, particularly in the provinces of Limpopo, Northern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and indeed the Northwest. Particularly in the rural provinces, we see a larger jump, meaning that there are more people who were discouraged to go out and look for employment. So we see a larger jump between the official and the expanded unemployment rate. The difference between that brown color and the gray color tells us that we have lesser people in most rural provinces looking for employment, actively looking for employment for reasons of being discouraged or otherwise.
Right, back with you tonight. That conversation on unemployment figures released today by the statistician-general. Dr. Chifipa can weigh in here. People in rural areas are feeling more and more despondent to look for work in South Africa. What has been our key drive in as far as our economic development? What has been shaping our economic development, at least in the last 3 decades? And is that the right thing that we should have been pursuing?
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for all the listeners that are also watching us here, and all my panels members. I think, first of all, before I even digest these figures and look at what needs to happen in the economy, let me start with this African proverb, which says, when the music changes, so does the dance. And that's what we must be talking from. When the music changes, so does the dance. Now, the question we ask ourselves is, have we changed the dance? Or has the music changed? The current environment clearly tells us that the environment in terms of where we're operating at is such a way that unemployment remains quite high. And the question we ask ourselves, why do we have this environment where unemployment remains quite high? The only way you can create jobs is through massive investment in the economy. And there are 3 areas where you can look at from the investment point of view. One is new investment in the economy. The second one is expanding the existing investment in the economy. And the third one is sustaining the existing investment in the economy. Now, if you look at all those 3 factors and what has transpired in the past 2 decades in the South African economy, it is in such a way that our ratio of investment to GDP has remained below 20%. And that's something that we have to look at addressing going forward. If you look at some of the major economies or some of the emerging economies such as China or some of the Asian tigers, as we used to call them, their ratio of fixed investment to GDP is well above that figure that we're still dealing with in terms of South African perspective point of view. China, you're looking at for a 2% in terms of ratio of fixed investment to GDP. And if you look at the employment numbers from the China point of view, it's actually around, unemployment is around 4.9%. Now, what China have done best is implementation of policy. They set a 5-year agenda and they make sure that whatever has been done, whatever has been planned is actually implemented. That's something which is lacking from our side. I agree with the former statistician-general in the issue of around planning. When you plan, you must have a target. One of the lessons we did, which I think that we can say that there's something positive from the South African point of view, is that there is a lesson which said that when we plan, we can deliver. We deliver the World Cup projects. That was a key element which I think can be a point of excellence. Things can be done if we have a plan to deliver. All the World Cup projects which were supposed to be done were actually finished on time. It means the sense of delivery happens in the South African economy. So the challenge we are facing at this stage is if you take a sectoral approach, so let's say the key sectors of the South African economy, right. Mining, manufacturing, and construction. Right. What are the challenges? Yeah. Energy issues are the key challenges in most of the key sectors of the economy. Logistical costs are the key issues we're facing in the economy. Right. So as long as we don't address those issues, then we will still have the problems of unemployment in the South African economy. I'm going to come back and I want us to deal with that a little bit more, Dr. Mhango, but I want to bring in Isobel here. Isobel, please do come in. Improving equality of opportunities for workers, but also for businesses, clearly has been one of the big challenges that we are dealing with here, because I mean, if there are no opportunities for businesses, therefore they will not be employing generally.
Thanks very much, Thabo, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this august panel. I think that you have hit the nail on the head, although I might approach it from a slightly different perspective. We are advised constantly by members of government that jobs have to be created and people need to be moved into jobs. And when we talk about social security as a way of ensuring that people have access to income, and therefore the ability to stimulate their own economic activity. We're told by people such as the current finance minister that this might be something which stimulates dependency. In fact, there was some suggestion that this is intentional, an attempt to try and keep Black African youth out of jobs. Now, I think as the other panelists have pointed out already, we are in a structural crisis where we don't have the jobs to create the employment. We've seen a devastating increase to the expanded definition of unemployment of 46%, but as has already been pointed out, for 15 to 24-year-olds, that's 77% unemployment. So basically, if you take 10 youngsters, not even 3 out of those 10 are going to be employed. And this means that as people rise and go forward through the labor market, we're losing the skills, we're losing the experience. And we're also losing a sense of being connected into the economy. And for us at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, that really is our concern. I mean, just in this last 2 days, we saw in Gauteng a tragic suicide in Sandton City, and Faith Mazibuko talking about the fact that suicides in Gauteng had increased by 90% in the last 12 months. Yeah. We know from the statistics that the former statistician-general spoke to, that even before COVID-19, South Africa was in a crisis. I think that many of us have got to the point where, in fact, there is very little more that can be said that we haven't said already. Yeah. As the previous speakers have spoken to, we need to look at what we're planning for. And in fact, what I was thinking about this afternoon was an old idea that we floated a couple of years ago about the need to have a Poverty and Unemployment Commission. Our concern is, of course, that everything turns into a commission and nothing happens. But we need to have a crisis declared about the fact that the levels of unemployment are unsustainable, that the poverty that people are experiencing are causing such levels of desperation, depression, and anxiety, that the violence that we saw in July, in the 8 days in July, which led to 50 billion rand of GDP loss and 23 billion is the estimate currently from the insurers about the actual loss of property.
Yeah.
We're seeing huge levels of loss because people are not invested. Now, what is the result that we need to be seeing? The one thing that I want to say is the courageous people in the Department of Social Development who consistently push forward the social relief of distress, getting slapped down by people in National Treasury who say to them that this is not what we need. We cannot create the jobs, but quite frankly, if you follow the research that DSD has done on how the 350 social relief of distress was used in the first half year in which it was rolled out, the amount of economic activity that it brought forward was absolutely astounding. But then we need to have the kinds of policies that recognize that we need to ensure that income distributed creates opportunities. What you can't have is give people an income grant and then say you'll lose it as soon as you start generating your own money. That's a complete disincentive to enable people to use that to get into the economy. That's what I'm saying, is that jobs are not going to come from the top. Jobs need to be created from the bottom up.
We'll talk more and expand on that, what role, what space is there for governments to get into this and get more involved as far as fiscal stimulus is concerned. But Dr. Musabayana, let's talk about, jump into some of the prevalent priorities if you're looking even at advanced or even emerging market economies. Labor market priorities are one of the issues that would want to zoom in. What are the barriers to full-time labor market participation in South Africa, particularly, as Dr. Alex Mashilo puts it, of Africans, particularly women, and particularly young people? And we speak of dualism in South Africa. What are the causes of this dualism and informality sometimes that occurs? Please unmute for us if you can. Dr. Musabayana, please unmute. Dr. Musabayana, please, if you can just press the unmute button there so that we can be able to hear you. Your mic is currently muted.
Yes.
There you are.
I wish I could get paid every time I'm told, please unmute. I would be a billionaire by now. I think the issue of access to the labor market and the structural setup of the labor market. Now, the data that came out from Stats SA shows us that if you look at the top 10 sectors in the economy, only 3 are creating jobs at a higher percentage than the sector's contribution to economic growth, and that is trade, construction, and agriculture. That tells us that the structure of the economy and the employment creation capacity of the key sectors of the economy, there is a misalignment. You realize that the impact of digitalization, automation, as we call it, the fourth industrial revolution, has changed the nature of work, the future of work. And you can see that sectors that should normally be high employment generating sectors like manufacturing are actually shedding jobs. And that has to do with this global transformation in the nature of work. And if we now say in the South African context, what are the impediments of young people to access jobs? Clearly it's skills. Clearly it's the issue of digital skills. I think studies have shown that anything between 30 and 40% of those who start grade R don't matriculate. And that even then, when they do, there's a big question mark around the quality of the passes that they have. I think there's a talk about the 30% pass rate.
Yeah.
And then there's the nature of the composition of the curricula that the young people are going through. In the end, you hear employers saying they are not job ready. So that becomes a big constraint, and that reflects in the figures. But let me also say, the data shows us that when you compare this with other countries globally, when you compare South Africa's performance with her peers, let's look at the BRICS. If you were to look at that, and the ILO has been publishing the COVID monitor on the impact of COVID on employment over the past 2 years, it is clear that there are some factors in South Africa that are global, but there are some factors that are internal to the country. You will see that the 2 provinces that account for almost 46, 48%, almost half of the job losses, it's Gauteng and KZN. And it is clear that this is directly related to the riots that took place.
Yeah.
So there are some factors that are impacting the economy, which are global factors, but there are also domestic own goals,
right.
if I could call them,
right.
that are a challenge.
Let's take a break.
And I want to echo.
I will come back to you again, Dr. Musabayana. I need to take a break here. We'll come back and weigh in a little bit more. Has the music changed or has the dance changed? And are we able to deliver those skills? We'll ask Dr. Pali Lehohla when we come back that are required for the jobs that are available on the market. 072-110-5584 with your views tonight. We're back in a moment.
We can see that the formal sector decreased by 571,000 jobs between the second quarter and the third quarter of 2021. Of course, we can see that the informal sector went up by 9,000. All the other sectors, including agriculture and private households, have gone down. Agriculture by 32,000 and private households by 65,000. When we look at the sectors, we can see that employment declined by 660,000 between the second quarter and third quarter of 2021. All sectors went on the negative, particularly trade that was hit the most, having lost about 309,000 jobs.
Back with you tonight on In Focus, discussing those numbers delivered by the Statistician-General on unemployment in the country tonight. Still with us, partner Isobel Frye, Joni Musabayana, Dr. Joni Musabayana, as well as Dr. Chifipa Mhango, Dr. Pali Lehohla, and Dr. Alex Mashilo. And you're a part of this conversation. We'll take your WhatsApp messages in a moment, 072-110-5584. Dr. Pali, formal sector jobs have decreased, and informal sector jobs, casual agricultural jobs, seem to have been on a high. But if we want to keep people on a full-time employment trajectory, they need to be coming into that formal sector, showing to an extent that there is a poor matching of workers with jobs. So we're poorly equipped overall, particularly on the digital side, to take up these jobs. Can we deliver on this? Is this something that we can fix? Is this a low-hanging fruit that we can fix immediately?
The question is, what is the alternative? If we seek the alternative, is too ghastly, and 9 July may repeat itself several times. And if the unemployment of the youth is anything to go by, we are not producing knowledge where it should be, which is amongst the youth. So there is no silver bullet, let me say. And I think our policies have been such that we thought there is a silver bullet, the master plans and everything, and saying that the macroeconomic framework is intact and is sacrosanct, it shouldn't be tampered with. We've worked on a modeled process here, which looks at everything, the macro, the micro, trade and industry, social policies. All those have to be attended to immediately and simultaneously. There is no silver bullet. This idea of saying that the debt to GDP ratio is too high, now you get a windfall of the super minerals boom. You don't even know what to do with that money. So it shows that the government has failed dismally to think about scenarios around what happens when what happens. In the absence of such a tactical plan at the center of government, you realize that we actually are just directionless. So it is not possible to move out of this morass, given the deficiency, serious deficiency at the center of government from a planning perspective. That is why we think of silver bullets, master plans, this, that, individual, instead of attacking these things simultaneously, including and importantly, dealing with social policy. And then when you bring all this together, you can be on a path that is better. At the moment, even the reconstruction and recovery plan shows that it will not grow the economy even more than 3%. At most, it will go to 3%. It's only when you temper the macro economics such as access to finance, looking at interest rates, looking at the role of the bank and everything else, that macro part, then you can actually find that there is a pathway. As long as you don't deal with that, let's forget it. It's not going to happen.
Dr. Alex Mashilo, come in here on that particular question. Dr. Pali saying we got some windfall from the mining sector, and in most instances we talk about a growth-friendly tax regime to increase the share of tax revenue. Well, we got the increase somewhat in tax revenue. Did that help, and will that deliver anything to us, and should we expect it
to? We have serious problems. I firstly wish to deal with the issue of skills. You know, in the Freedom Charter, it was written that forced labor shall be abolished. If you go back to the reasons why that clause was inserted there, you will know that there were trucks coming from the mines, coming from agricultural sectors, coming from the construction sectors, forcing people. The only skill that they had to possess at that time was that they were put on a scale. If they had so much kilograms, they were taken by force. That persisted even up to the 1980s and so forth. It is important. Skills are important. But it is important to underline the fact that as long as you have a very small productive base in the economy, that productive base cannot take everybody you are training. There are changes, as Joni indicated, and I wish to give an example with one mine in Limpopo province. The mine is mining an important mineral. It is an open pit mine. They invested billions of rand to move from open pit mine into underground mining. The key feature of the new production process that is going to produce the minerals, is going to produce the first minerals from underground in 2022 will be autonomous mining. So likely what you are going to see as we move forward, mining will still remain a key sector, but because of technological change, because of automation, because of digitalization, its contribution to employment may not be as it was before. And I wish to address this question to distinguish other sectors. In the automotive sector, from my own research, it is shown that changes in automation do not necessarily do away with employment. If, for example, you, like at Ford Motor Company in Silverton, increase output and you introduce changes in technology, you can employ more workers. That has happened at VW in the Eastern Cape. It is happening at Toyota. So we need to look at everything in its interrelatedness, and we need to look at each sector of the economy according to its specificity. I wish to emphasize what Dr. Pali Lehohla said. Looking at a single economic policy or a single social policy is not going to be helpful. No policy or no stone must be left unturned insofar as our policies are concerned. Every policy must be put to the table. Like we talk about COVID-19, every policy must be subjected to scientific scrutiny. And insofar as science is concerned, policies that have prevailed in our country have failed to overcome the crisis of unemployment. In 2019, August, to give an example, the National Treasury introduced what they called a blueprint towards the economic strategy for South Africa. When you read that document, you will notice that its core elements, called the so-called structural reforms, have been recommended by the OECD after its introduction of the Going to Growth publication following the 2008 crisis. Right. So there has been less democracy, and more submissions were made. Only some errors were corrected. The modeling errors in that document were corrected, and that policy was pushed forward as it is. So we need changes in the policy, and for us to achieve changes in policy, we must think from the ground of South Africa, not from Paris, not from Washington.
Dr. Mhango, you've already touched on this issue of the provision of accessible quality infrastructure, but also its efficient use, and particularly when we're talking energy, particularly for the mining sector here, which could possibly employ more. Can we deliver on that particular priority?
Yes, I think there's a possibility of delivery on the basis of historical patterns. But the question we ask ourselves is to say, have we prioritized delivery at this stage? Last year alone, when we were under the COVID lockdown, we had in the economy we had two economic recovery plans. One was in April, the other one was in October. The one in October last year focused on the infrastructure delivery plan as a lead towards the recovery of the economy. Now, when you look at the current figures now, what these figures are telling you is that nothing in terms of delivery has been done towards that last year's recovery plan, which was based on the principle to be driven by infrastructure investment in the economy. That is why you're seeing that 65,000 jobs have been lost in the construction sector. Because if the plan was working, it means that those jobs would have been created in the construction sector. That's one thing you are picking up in the figures. The other thing I think we also need to look at here is there is some element of opportunity, because the figures are also telling us that if you are a graduate, the chances of you being employed are high. If you are with a tertiary qualification, the chances of being employed are also high. But anything below that, it means it's disaster. And that's where the significant numbers of our population is actually lying in, especially the black population. So those are some of the dynamics that these figures are also telling us. Now, how would you move from there? I did touch earlier on around what other countries are doing. For instance, China. During the time what we were talking about, we have lost jobs. China, just this year alone, created 11.3 million jobs from a target set of 11 million. That shows you that when you are serious in terms of delivery, things can be done. Remain focused, set targets, and have a follow-up through in terms of your targets. We are still in the policy drafting phase for the past 24 years. Policy drafting, in fact, we're very good at that. I think there's an opportunity for us to start looking at being implementers of policies rather than policy drafters. That's something needs to change. I'm also coming from the steel and engineering sector. And I think my colleagues here did mention around the master plans. I've got this master plan here, which is called the Steel Master Plan. This Steel Master Plan took years and years for it to be launched. It was only launched this year on the 11th of June. I was there at that function. All the issues that have been identified in the Steel Master Plan are what is the thing that which can actually be dealt up easily. Energy issues, trying to control the issue of imports into the economy. Logistical matters, cost, locomotive issues from transit and so forth.
Yeah.
Those do not require 10 years to come with a master plan like that. I think that's a frustration we're facing. No stomach works. Poverty is still drilling in our economy from the unemployment point of view.
Absolutely.
Now, you cannot have a situation whereby a master plan in the steel and engineering sector takes 4 or 5 years to actually implement.
Dr. Mhango, let's hold it there and take a break and come back. Isobel Frye and Dr. Joni Musabayana as well weighing in. We'll take some of your tweets tonight and how you are seeing the structural reforms playing out. Are there some tailor-made solutions that we need to be looking at as far as reform is concerned? Do stay with us. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back live with us tonight. You're on In Focus. A quick look at how you are weighing in on those numbers tonight on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. This one from Mabatu in Springs. I'm running a consulting and recruitment agency. Very qualified people are being rejected because their credit status is being checked, even though this is against the law. So they are discouraged to look for jobs because they know they are blacklisted. Abe in Pretoria saying if government could discontinue the tender process and employ people, this will have a tremendous impact on the employment rate in South Africa. Those are some of your thoughts tonight, and of course we'll have Isobel also weigh in with that in a moment. But Dr. Musabayana, let's talk about this. Average hours, working hours per week in South Africa, quite high. you've got labor market dualism, and you've got old people who have no incentive to retire, right? And they're saying this is part of the reason why you've got a huge cohort of young people who are unable to enter the job market. What should we be doing? I think you're back there. Here's another $1 for you. Please unmute for us.
I think we should dissuade ourselves from the thinking that to create this job that we need to rotate people in. I think the overall discussion of the plenary today is we need to create more and better jobs. And it is clear that these jobs are much more in the digital space, that low-skilled menial jobs, that era is finished. I think we have to agree. And that to do that, we first of all need to ensure that our educational system creates young people who are job ready, particularly in the digital skills space. Now, because I'm the ILO, let me make a disclaimer. We or an acknowledgement, we are working with the government. Colleagues here, Dr. Mashilo has highlighted the importance of a cross-sectoral policy, another policy, Dr. Mhango, sorry, to look at the issue of jobs. And we are working, I must confess, with the National Department of Employment and Labor on a national employment policy or a national employment strategy, if you will, which is trying to give guidance at the sectoral level, so that for every sectoral plan that is there, we've been told about the steel strategy, which took 10 years. We may ask him, is there an employment section there? What are the employment targets in that sector? And that's what the national employment policy is trying to do, to ensure that if we have an agricultural policy, it must have an employment section, and it must be consulted, agreed upon, and must have employment targeting. The idea of employment targeting, I think, is an idea whose time has come. It is clear that you can have very good macroeconomic fundamentals as pushed by the Washington Consensus, and jobs which are supposed to trickle down, they don't trickle down. They need a deliberate focus. And I'm hoping that this national employment policy strategy that we are working on with the government may help, first of all, to instill into government departments, because it is not National Department of Labor that is going to create jobs. It is the departments that are supporting, let's say, the real industry that create jobs. But if the guidance on how many jobs are to be created, and if the monitoring mechanism is not there, then perhaps we end up in the difficult situation that we find ourselves today. So the sectoral policies that have clear employment targets and that are driven by a social contract. The idea of a social contract, not just at the national level, COSATU, FEDUSA, NACTU, and BUSA at that level, but we need to bring it down to the sectors, and that there is an honest dialogue about what do we have to do so that agriculture creates the kind of jobs that are required. What do we have to do so that manufacturing goes back, textile goes back to creating the jobs that are required. Finance is an area that is shedding jobs in a big way, particularly because of the changing nature of work. What is it that is required to ensure that those higher value digitally based jobs can happen? Yeah. There's talk about localization. I think I need to touch upon that. It is clear that the global model, where African countries, and unfortunately South Africa still being one of them, contribute, are exporters of raw produce. And then we import finished goods. This model is at the heart of the unemployment crisis that South Africa and the rest of Africa is facing. We need value addition, but we need to be competitive in our value addition because we have to compete with other value-adding centers, particularly in the Asian nations. So I think these approaches could take us closer to the idea that we want, but at the heart of it has to be a real look at agriculture, at education, at tertiary education, the type of skills that are imparted there, but also the deliberate employment targeting at sectoral level, and over a much greater drive towards value addition rather than export of basic commodities and raw unprocessed minerals.
All right. It's about a quick one. We have literally about a minute for you now to weigh in on the question of stringent labor market regulations, one, but also things like the procurement policies hindering this thing of creating jobs.
Thanks, Thabo, and I'm sure that you didn't give me little time to finish up because I'm a woman, but I do have the last word. So I'm actually not going to answer your question. I'm going to tell you what I think needs to be done. I think the panelists have given really good examples of the macroeconomic policies. I don't know how much time we have, however, given the increasing levels of destitution and hunger. I was talking about the social relief of distress. I think that social policy needs to really come to the fore rather than be pushed backwards as an orphan. I think what we need to do is have a commitment to a universal basic income grant starting from next year, which would give the stimulus to our economy. We also need to give people hope. We need to let people know that they haven't been forgotten. The authors of 8 Days of July talked about the fact at the end of the book that the unrest had ended, but they said, have we stopped the time, or is the time still right for another bloody power grab? I think as we approach the next general elections, we need to make sure that the population knows that they have a say, that in this democracy, how they vote is cast shows that they have a way to shape the future. I think that what all the other panelists have said is really important, but some of that takes time. We don't have time, so we need to be able to grasp the nettle. And we also need to say to some of the cabinet ministers who say that these kinds of things are not possible, that we haven't actually much alternative, as each of the speakers in their own turn has said. We need to be changing both the dance and the tune because the facts are speaking for themselves as the labour market figures spoke today.
Yeah. Does just finally from you, that does our space, and demand is weak at the moment, does our space permit for government to do more to I suppose complement some of the stimulus that is already in place?
I think government has the space to do a lot more. We talked about the commodity boom that's come through. We also have the need to look at the fiscal framework. Despite 27 years of failing economic policies, the Minister of Finance continues to say that the fiscal framework cannot be touched. At what stage do we look at that and say that the macroeconomic certainties are certainly something that need to be reconfigured? We have a major crisis when it comes to employment, but why is it that our macro policies, our monetary policy, we have a huge example if we look to the US of how we can look at modern monetary theory in terms of what kind of borrowing is necessary, what kind of debt is good debt. Instead, we get told that the same orthodox policies that are failing are the ones that need to be embraced. I think that as we head towards the February budget, we need to have far greater engagement. And I think it's going to be what we're going to be seeing over the Christmas period is that people are going to start voting with their feet on the streets. And in the face of the global pandemic, that's not what we can afford.
Yeah, indeed. Let me appreciate you all for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We'll leave it there for today. Isobel Frye and Dr. Mhango and Dr. Alex Mashilo, as well as Dr. Musabayana and Dr. Pali Lehohla. And thanks to you as well for joining us tonight and giving us your views.